Hello everybody, this is your friendly neighborhood professor, and some of you have expressed concerns with Skills Test 7 and the difficulty with Skills Test 7, and I would like to walk through some of the more challenging problems, and hopefully you can use this to figure out how to do some of the rest of the problems. Now, before we start, remember that you either need to know how to work with 30, 60, 90 right triangles or working with a unit circle, so make sure you have that handy. Another thing that you need to remember is that if you are having problems with fraction arithmetic, especially with pi over 4 and pi over 6 plus something like that, for the time being, ignore the pi and just in place of it in your mind, put a 1 and then do the fraction arithmetic as you would normally do. So if you had to do like pi over 6 plus pi over 2, don't worry about the pi, just add 1/6 plus 1/2 like you normally would, and then put the pi in the numerator at the end. So let's get started. Well, anyhow, the first problem I want to do is number 7. Seems pretty involved, so let me go ahead and write it out. It is -5 plus sine theta plus 11 pi over 6, sorry, equals -11/2. OMG, this thing looks horrendous. So, oh my God, what am I going to do? I'm going to fail the test, blah, blah, blah. Stop crying and let's start actually tackling this one step at a time. So the first thing we're going to do is make it look a little prettier, and we're going to do that. I mean, I said a little prettier. It's not going to look that pretty, but it's going to be a lot better than it looks now. We're going to do that by making a substitution. We're going to let A, or any other letter you like, equal whatever is the angle measurement, which in this case is theta plus 11 pi over 6. Then we're going to go back and replace that. We're going to go -5 plus sine, our letter that we chose, A, equals -11/2. Isn't that better? Doesn't that look like a happy little tree? Anyhow, now we solve this like we would any other trig equation. We would first begin by adding 5 to both sides. And this is where some of you are going to get your first mistake. Okay, remember how to add fractions. So let's just do a little bit on the side. If you're going to do -11/2 plus 5, you're going to first have to convert 5 into a fraction by putting it over 1. Then you're going to have to find a common denominator, which is 2. So -11/2 plus 5 over 1 changes to 10 over 2. Remember, if we multiply the denominator by 2, we have to multiply the numerator by 2. And that gives us -1/2. So now our new problem will be sine of A equals -1/2. Now, we need to solve for A. So what angle measures give us a sine of -1/2? Well, you can either look on your unit circle or you can use your knowledge of right triangles. So if you have 1/2, if you have 1/2, let's just worry about the 1/2 portion right now. What is sine? That's opposite over hypotenuse. So that's opposite is 1 and hypotenuse is 2. Now, what angle measure gives us an opposite side of 1 and a hypotenuse of 2? Well, we've only learned 2 types of special case right triangles. One is a 45-45, 90 isosceles right triangle, in which case each side is 1 and the hypotenuse is √2. Or We've dealt with 30, 60, 90 right triangles where opposite the 30 degrees is 1, opposite the 60 is root 3, and opposite the 90 is 2. Remember from geometry, the side opposite the smallest angle is the smallest side, and the side opposite the largest angle, which in a right triangle will be your 90 degrees, is the largest side. So the angle measure that will give you an opposite side of 1 and a hypotenuse of 2 would be 30 degrees, which if we convert it into radians becomes pi over 6. Now, we're not done because sine of A is not 1/2, sine of A is negative 1/2. And remember from our discussion in class that in a coordinate plane, that in the first quadrant, all trig functions are positive. In the second quadrant, sine is positive. In the third quadrant, t is positive. And the fourth quadrant, cosine is positive. So t for tangent, by the way. Now, where is sine negative? Because it's a negative 1/2. Well, in the third and fourth quadrant. Well, we know that a angle measure of pi over 6 gives us a opposite side of 1 and a hypotenuse of 2, so a sine of 1/2. So what is the associated pi over 6 angle in the third quadrant? Well, in the third quadrant, we add our angle measure in the first quadrant to pi, and we get pi plus pi over 6, or 1 plus 1 over 6, which is 7 pi over 6. So that is our angle measure in our third quadrant. And in the fourth quadrant, it will be 2 pi minus our first quadrant angle measure. So the 2 pi minus, or 2 minus 1/6 will be 11 pi over 6. Now, remember the period of a sine function. The period of sine cosine is 2 pi, whereas the period of a tangent function and cotangent function is just pi. So we have to add plus 2 and pi to both of these angle measures. Now, we've pretty much solved this equation for A, but A is not what we're looking for. We're looking for theta. And we made the substitution that A equals theta plus 11 pi over 6. So we're going to go back and replace that and say theta plus 11 pi over 6 equals 7 pi over 6 plus 2n pi. And theta plus 11 pi over 6 equals 11 pi over 6 plus 2n pi. So let's start off with the second solution because it's going to give us a little bit of an easier answer. And we see that if we subtract 11 pi from both sides, the 11 pi's cancel and we get theta equals 2n pi. Okay, now back to the first one. If we subtract 11 pi over 6 from both sides, we get theta equals 7 pi over 6 minus 11 pi over 6, which is negative 4 pi over 6, or negative 2 pi over 3, because that's what 4/6 is, it's 2/3, plus 2n pi. So what is this solution actually saying? This solution says that as long as theta is any coterminal angle of negative 2 pi thirds, or any coterminal angle of 0 plus 2n pi, that will suffice to give us our solution for the equation above. So our concern is to find all angle measures between 0 and 2 pi. So we're going to start making substitutions for n. We're going to let n, since it's an integer, be 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on and so forth until we reach 2 pi radians, which for us is going to be 6 pi over 3. Okay, so let's get started. Well, let's start with n equals 0, and we're going to start with this equation first. So when n is 0, we get a theta of negative 2 pi over 3. Well, since we're looking for all angle measures between 0 and 2 pi, negative 2 pi over 3 is not within that range, so we're not going to include it. So now we're going to let n equal 1. Well, when n is 1, we get 2 pi over 3, negative 2 pi over 3 plus 2 pi, or shorthand, negative 2/3 plus 2. Well, negative 2/3 plus 2 is the same as negative 2/3 plus 6/3, which gives us 4/3. And 4/3, or 4 pi over 3, is between 0 and 2 pi. So we will include that in our answer. So one of our answers will be 4 pi over 3. Now, the next thing, we're going to let n be 2. Well, if n is 2, we're going to get negative 2 pi over 3 plus 4 pi. And 4 pi is the same as 12 pi over 3, which will give us an answer of 10 pi over 3. But 10 pi over 3 is larger than 2 pi, so it is out of the boundaries of what we're looking for. So we've exhausted all of the angles that this equation can give us, the first equation can give us. So now we're going to go to the second equation, and we're going to let n equal 0. Well, when n is 0, 2n pi is 0, so 0 is between 0 and 2 pi, and we're going to include that in our answer. Now, we're going to let n equal 1. And, well, when n is 1, we get 2 pi. Now, remember, the range is between 0 and 2 pi, but not including 2 pi. So even though when n is 1, we get a theta of 2 pi, we cannot include 2 pi in our solution. So our answers are just 4 pi over 3 and 0. So if we rewrite this, it would be, our answers would be 0, 4 pi over 3. This is just written in ascending order, which, if you look at your multiple choice answers, is answer A. And that's about it. And that is how you solve number 7. This is problem number 7 on skills test 7. And I'm going to be back soon with another problem for skills test 7. I hope this helps. And if you have any questions, you know how to reach me via remind or text, and I will speak with you shortly. Thank you.